Hi everybody. Right, so welcome to this tutorial. So we've got quite a bit to get through, so I'm just going to dive in. This one is the trying to do a pull focus in 360. So obviously the problem with trying to do a pull focus in 360 footage, I'm not going to talk you through all this because I'm just assuming you're following along now, is that of course everything by now, because we've done this enough times, is that everything in the scene is sharp, so even if we were to add a 2D edit, for example, we'd look at our base would still be sharp. I've already stabilized and patched out the tripod and everything in this clip for you. Okay, everything is nice and sharp, so we can't do a pull focus because there's no areas that are out of focus that we can move around, and that's what we're going to try and create with this tutorial today. So I mean, it's it's one of those things. It is a kind of a post-production effect, and like any post-production effect, the longer you spend fettling it, the better it'll look. We're just going to do a basic version today, just to sort of show you what I've got in mind. So I'm going to basically move. Here's my character, and I'm basically going to move my focus from these trees in the background and pull focus between these trees and this character in 360 degrees. Sounds good. To try and make the whole thing a bit more cinematic. So we need to have multiple layers, and we need to be good at housekeeping with our layers to make sure we know what we're running, because we're going to be running multiple layers at once. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is right click on this one, and I'm going to rename this one background. Okay, then I'm going to go to here and I'm going to click Command D to duplicate that, and right click on this one, and that's going to become foreground. And I'm going to Command D again. I don't know what that is on PC, I'm afraid, but it's just duplicating it, or you can just drag that back down. It doesn't really matter. Okay, I'm just doing duplication for quickness. Right click and rename, and this is going to be depth of field line. Okay, again, as I say, you don't have to duplicate because we haven't made any changes to this clip yet, so you could literally just pull this back down over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to call this one character mask, and finally I'm going to add another layer, right click on this one, and I'm going to call this one character roto. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to mask out this character, and we need to do it in such a way that we can kind of get a nice clean pull on the edge, separating him from the background, so that we can just apply different blur effects to different parts of the scene. Okay, now because we're going to be using the Roto Brush tool, we don't need all of this, so I'm just going to literally at this point move my player marker to about 10 seconds. That's fine. So we're just going to use this 10 seconds here. Okay, so here's our workspace. Then we're just going to be having him checking his phone effectively, then putting his phone away and looking up in a dramatic fashion, whatever. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my character Roto Brush. Okay, so here's my first character, and I'm going to double click on this one so I can add a Roto Brush onto him. Okay, it might be easier from our point of view in terms of what we're trying to do to turn off all the other layers at this point, so we can see when we've got our finished Roto Brush effect. So I'm going to come into my Roto Brush here. Okay, zoom in on him a bit more. You can see it's going to be difficult for the Roto Brush because his hair's all kind of, I have longer hair then, and his hair's blurring in with the background and everything else. So I'm just going to start by kind of moving this around like so, getting the jacket in. I can come back down and do the legs in a minute. In fact, I'm going to do like that. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to move this down, and I'm going to add more onto his foot. If you remember the Roto Brush, you drag the green to say I want more. So that's found those edges, and then you hold down the Option key and use the red line to say no, I don't want you to stop there. So that's found that, apart from that leg. And I'm going to go Option around the shoulder like so, and in on the back of the neck like that. That's not looking too bad. Cut that off, and that bit, and there into like so. I can fix that in a second. That's looking good. And now if I zoom in a bit more, we can see it's kind of overlapping the side of his face slightly, so I'm just going to get that back. There we go. That's not looking too bad. I'm just going to come in on this corner there. That's looking good. Right, and then I want a bit more of his hair. There we go. That'll do. Whatever. He says that'll do. That bit. Right, and that'll do. Right, so that's our Roto Brush. Okay, now it's not going to do a particularly good pull on this because it's not contrasty enough. It's going to struggle. Okay, but that's okay because we're going to try and fix that afterwards with another mask. So I've got that now. I'm going to play this through and it'll do my Roto Brush thing, and I'll let it do that, and I'll speed this up and come back to you in a minute once it's got through to the 10-second mark. Okay, so what we can do now is we can move on to our composition, and we can kind of see what we've got here. So we've got an edge, and if we move it through, we can kind of see it's still propagating a little bit. You can see it's not quite captured it properly, particularly the back of his head. I could have played around with the settings a bit to kind of try and adjust that. But the thing with the Roto Brush is even if you get a decent pull, what it'll do is it'll give you quite a sharp edge. And I've tried this with this effect previously, and when you apply the blur, what happens is it blurs the person but not the edge, and of course the edge remains sharp, which isn't what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave that now. So that's not looking too bad. We're going to now create another mask which we're going to use to soften the edge of this character a little bit. So I'm going to turn off my character roto and turn on the character mask effect, and make sure the character mask effect is highlighted. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my pen tool, and I'm going to just mask around my character quite loosely, because I'm not going to try and rotoscope him in a precise way, because that's what the Roto Brush is for. Instead, what I'm going to do, and there's my mask, instead what I'm going to do is come to my mask feather tool, and now I'm going to add points onto my, oops, like so. I'm going to add points onto my character, where I'm going to bring in these points of edge feather, okay, to try and really feather it quite close to him, okay, like so. So that's looking not too bad for now. That. There you go. As I say, it's not the end of the world if you overlap a little bit, but what we're looking for is we're looking for specifically like bits like this, where it's sort of, there we go. So we're looking effectively for this to be, there we go, getting in nice and close to our character, like so. So that'll do. Foot. So yeah, you see what I'm trying to achieve here is a nice edge feather that's sort of customized to match his shape. Like that. That'll do. Not quite like that, but that'll do. That'll be fine. Okay. There we go. A bit more like that. So again, you can kind of fettle yours a bit more. But what I'm going to do now is go into my character mask, and I'm going to turn on the masks here, mask path and mask expansion, just in case I need it. Okay, so I'm going to move it along. He's kind of moving around. That's why we've adjusted that's why we've done the edge feather tool. Okay, so his jacket's moved there, so I'm going to be moving this point in like that. Okay, and then he's going to put his arm out like so. So at this point then I need to move the whole mask back like that to make sure I get what I want, but then I'm also going to bring this edge feather in like so. Okay, and that can kind of come out as well, because I don't want to lose any of the edge of him. It's more important that I get background really. Okay, so that's looking okay. A bit too far away there. So again, you can sort of, you know, I'm not going to be spending a lot of time fettling this, but you can if you want to. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then he puts his arm back in, and so the jackets come back out again like so. So it's much more sympathetic doing it this way than it is trying to rotoscope him so he's got like sharp edges and bits and pieces, because that just doesn't work. So instead what we're going to be doing is using the edge feather, and that just gives us a bit more leeway to just create the effect that we want. Okay, so that's all fine. Okay, so it's kind of looking okay. I think I'll sort of leave it at that, because as I say, I don't want to sport with your patience as this is a tutorial, but you can kind of see what I'm trying to get to anyway, hopefully. All right. So that's good for now then, and then we can just leave him stunned like that. So what's going to happen then is this feathered mask layer and our rotoscope layer, which I'm now going to add, are now going to work in concert with one another. So you can see the sharp edge of the Roto Brush layer, and then our mask layer underneath. But hopefully that's going to, when we start adding the blur effects, that's going to start to sort of soften that up a bit. Okay, so I can zoom back out again. So there's our character. Now I'm going to bring in my backgrounds. Okay. So I'm going to click on foreground here, and I'm going to get my pen tool again, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a foreground which is kind of going to go from him around like so. I'm not going to make a nice sharp line, I'm just going to go like this. Okay, and that's the idea, is that this is now going to be blurring this foreground. Okay, so I'm going to close that down, open up my foreground and masks, and I'm going to feather the edge of that. I don't know how much I'll need to feather it yet. I'm just going to go to 30 for now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come over to my effects and presets tab. Okay, and I need the VR effects in immersive video, because I don't know if you remember, I've shown you this before, but if you add a normal blur to a 360 effect, it'll look absolutely fine in an echo rectangular, right up to the point where you try and put it together in an edit in a 360 image, and this edge where it meets that edge will not line up properly. The blur will have ended and you'll get a sharp line in your footage, which isn't what we want. So we need these infinite effects that we can apply to 360 footage to create that effect. So I'm going to go to VR blur and drag that onto my foreground, and I'm going to bring this is foreground. I can go to my effect controls up here and bring that VR blur up to, I don't know, let's say something like 20. I can turn off my DOF line because I'm not using it for now. So that's my my foreground blur. I'm going to just move this piece down a bit. There we go. All right. So that's my foreground blur effect. If I click away, so you can see how that's that. And then when I start adding blur to him, then you'll hopefully start to see what's what. Okay. In fact, I might just do that now. So I'm going to close that down, and just to make sure it's the same kind of blur, even though we don't need it because this is only a small effect, but it's the same type of blur, I'm going to add a VR blur to the character mask and also to the character roto. Okay, and now I can go up to the same amount of blurriness that I added to the last one. So I'm going to go up to, I think it was, whatever it was, foreground was 20. So I'm going to add blurriness of 20, and I'm going to add character mask blurriness of 20. And now if I click away, you can see what's going on now is the background's sharp and the foreground isn't. Okay, so what we need to do now then, I mean, you could spend time on this adding more layers, because these trees are further away than these trees, and if you wanted to, you could do a pull focus by doing those trees and these ones, and then keep moving that focus to this guy, you know. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to go with a plain background moving towards this guy. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to go into our DOF line now. Okay, and I'm going to turn off the other two backgrounds just so you can see what's going on here, and I'm going to take my rectangle tool on my DOF line, okay, depth of field line, and I'm going to move it across like so, and I'm going to say right like that. Okay, I'm going to go into my mask and feather that a bit so that it's nice and soft. Okay, and I might actually make that just a bit bigger just because it and I can use the mask expansion to take it down. That'll do. Okay, just so I can see it better. So what I'm going to do at this beginning is I'm going to turn on mask path and also mask expansion, and I'm going to reduce that mask expansion down to a nice thin line. Okay, at -30, that'll do. And mask path, I'm just going to move it using my arrow keys. I don't want to overlap the trees too much, so I'm going to leave it there. Okay, so this is going to remain sharp all the way through, and the idea is that as I bring my background and what have you in, as I add more blur to this background, this is going to remain sharp and look like a focus line that's kind of creeping forward. So what we're going to do is I'm now going to go to my VR blur and add VR blur to my background. And so now this is the start of my shot, and as I move forward I'm going to start my focus pull about here at the 2-second mark. Okay, so I'm now going to say on my background, open up my background and effects, and I'm going to go into my VR blur effect and turn on the blurriness stopwatch at 2 seconds. Okay, and so that's now going to start building up until about, I don't know, let's say the 6-second mark, shall we say? Okay, and so now I'm going to bring that up to whatever, like maybe 50, something like that perhaps. Okay, now it'll take a while to propagate that because obviously I've got a Roto Brush effect in the way now, okay, which is going to start getting in the way. But yeah, so that should start to look okay. So that's, yeah, that's the blur effect starting to kick in now. Can you see that happening? So what we need to do now is we need to say, right, here's our 2-second mark. So we're going to move our DOF line. It's at this position here. So I can add, I can just bring these keyframes along to the 2-second mark, like so. And now what I'm going to do is at the 6-second mark, which is the point where I want him to kick in, I'm now going to click on my mask path and use my arrow keys to bring this down. And I'm also going to expand my mask out. Like so if I turn off foreground and background, you can kind of see what's going on. Hopefully, is that my depth of field line is now kind of moving into conjunction with this guy. Okay, it's taken a little while as we've said because the Roto Brush is having to kind of figure it out. But if I zoom in, I can kind of go, right, mask path now, I'm going to just move this down until it kind of reaches his feet. That's the point at which he's now going to become sharp. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, can you see what I'm trying to do here? That this sharp line now is my line of focus, okay? And so that's now everything's in focus. So I'm going to need to feather the edge of that a bit more in a minute, but I can do that in a second. So I'm now going to come to my character Roto, and that's the point at which he needs to become sharp. So I'm going to go into my effects and VR blur and blurriness, which is 20, and I'm going to take that down to 0. Okay, but of course I want that to just pop in to existence. I don't want it to gradually go between 20 here and 0 here. So now I'm going to hold down Command on my keyboard and go back by 2 frames. You can use page up and page down keys to do that. And I'm going to bring that blurriness back up to 20. So it's the same amount until it suddenly pops into view. Okay, so that's the idea, is that as this line of focus creeps down, it'll keep creeping down until it reaches him. Remember, it's his feet because that's the bit that indicates the distance. And then we're going to, when it reaches him, then he should now pop into focus, like so. Okay, but you can see we've still got this chewy edge because we've got this mask behind. Okay, so now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close that down, making sure my playhead marker is at the right point. And now I'm going to do the same thing. So in fact, my command and go back 2 frames to the point where that's still soft. Okay, and now I'm going to turn on my effects and VR blur and make my blurriness there as 20. But then, that's my smoke alarm just doing a test. And I can move forward 2 frames. But what I don't want is for this to be completely because if I take the blurriness away, then you see the edge of the mask bit. Can you see how that's all sharp around the edge, which isn't really what I want? So I'm going to leave that at sort of like that sort of thing, you know. And then if I pull back and click away, what you can hopefully see, I can fettle that a bit more to make sure it's, you know, a bit more in keeping with the background. In fact, possibly the VR blur might not be the most useful. Maybe adding a Gaussian blur might be a better bet in terms of that. But basically, you can see what I've tried to do here is that we've got the background is sharp, and I pull back actually so you can see the whole image. background is sharp, and then as we get to the 2-second mark, then the focus starts to shift. So here's our edge, our line of focus, which is shifting forward. Okay, and then it gradually will crawl forward and get to the character about the 6-second mark, and then the character should spring into focus over the course of a couple of frames, and then we should have ourselves a nice sort of depth of fieldy effect kind of shot. Okay, so there we go, so we can render that through. So as I say, it's going to take a little while for the Roto Brush to populate that, but you're going to get the idea. And the final thing you can do then, as I say, I would probably, looking at this now, I think I would change the blur on the background, because I'm not completely sure about that. So I'm going to go into character mask, and I'm going to take that VR blur off. Okay, and I'm going to go into my effects and blur and sharpen, and I can add just a normal Gaussian blur to this one, because it's not going to overlap the edge of the frame. So that's the point at which he goes softer. If I open up the character roto as well, I can kind of see where those keyframes are. Okay, so there's my first keyframe. So I'm going to go into my Gaussian blur now, turn on my stopwatch, and I'm going to take my Gaussian blur up to match that background, which is about like that much. So yeah, 20 maybe. Probably just about do. If I go Shift Command and H, I'm going to turn off those lines. I can still see a bit of an edge there, so I'm going to do a bit more. That should do it. Okay, so 25, something like that. Okay, and then I'm going to come through Command and arrow keys forward 2 frames. So now my Roto brush character is now sharp, and now I'm going to bring the blurriness of my Gaussian blur down so that you can see the edge of the character underneath, kind of. You get the idea. Okay, so I think it just sort of tries to soften the edge a little bit. Okay, so that's the principle then. That's what we're trying to achieve anyway. And as I say, I think what I might do now, having looked at it again, is I might go through and adjust the mask on my character mask, Shift Command and H, and the thing that's bothering me is the bit above his head, so I might bring that down and that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? But you, again, as I say, you can fettle it and play with it until you get something that you like. Now then, the final thing you can do is just to try and get the effect in 360. Is I'm just going to add a 2D edit. This isn't actually going to be an edit, but I'm just going to add this anyway, just so I can see what it would look like. And now you can kind of get a sense of what it would be like. There's our focus line, so I can see in my 2D edit that I'm going to need to add more edge feathering onto my this layer, okay, because it's too sharp. So I could go back into my pull focus base shot, foreground, and feather that edge out more. Okay, so yeah, some of that maybe. Okay, and now if I go back into my edit 1, yeah, it's looking a bit better, yeah. And as you pull through, then you can kind of see that focus is going to start to develop, you see? So that's what the effect would kind of look like in 360. So I can kind of also see that my focus line now also needs a stronger edge feather. So I can go back into pull focus base shot, DOF line, and I'm going to feather that edge out as well to something a bit more dramatic like that. And now if I go back into edit 1, yeah, there you can see, so there's our focus line, there's our character. We can move around inside the shot, and that's kind of what it would look like, is that's our focus line. Do you see what I mean? So anyway, that's the technique. It is just one that I've kind of developed myself. It isn't one that is a kind of an industry standard one. If you can think of any other ways that I could do this, or any changes or what have you, I'd be delighted to hear them, because as I say, this is just something I've come up with myself. And if you sort of look at this and going, well, why didn't he do it like that instead, and I've just missed it, then please do let me know, because obviously I'm still learning After Effects as well. I mean, you never really know it properly. You know, you're always a student of it. So yeah, any thoughts on how you could do that, please do let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Nice one.